The chapel bells rang 3 times, and the world outside thought they were calling me to prayer. They didn't know those bells marked the closing bell of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, 13 hours ahead, where my orders had just moved $4.2 billion in semiconductor futures. I knelt in silence, rosary beads between my fingers, while Sister Maria whispered about humility. The other nuns believed I was meditating on scripture. I was calculating the compounding interest on my offshore bonds. No one here knew. No one could know. And that was exactly how it had to be. In my first life, I died at 34 in a hospital room that smelled of bleach and regret. The machines beeped their steady rhythm as my half-sister stood at the foot of my bed, her face a perfect mask of concern for the nurses. But I saw what others didn't, the faint smile tugging at her lips, the impatience in the way she checked her watch. Victoria. Beautiful, beloved Victoria. The daughter my father actually wanted. I'd spent my entire childhood trying to earn his approval, only to watch him give it freely to her. She was 3 years younger, born to his second wife after my mother died in childbirth, a fact he never let me forget. "Your mother's death was the price of your existence," he told me once, his voice flat with an old resentment that had calcified into permanent coldness. The memories of that first life still cut with surgical precision. I remembered being 7 years old, bringing home a perfect report card, all A's, a handwritten note from my teacher praising my mathematical aptitude. Father had glanced at it while opening his mail, muttered "good," and turned immediately to Victoria, who'd finger-painted a lopsided house. He'd spent 20 minutes admiring it, asking her about each colour choice, her creative process, her feelings. He'd hung it on the refrigerator while my report card went into a drawer. I remembered being 12, winning the regional science fair with a project on renewable energy solutions. Father had been too busy attending Victoria's piano recital, her first and last as it turned out, because she decided piano was too restrictive for her creative spirit. I'd stood on that stage, holding my first place trophy, scanning the audience for his face. He never came. When I got home that night, he was helping Victoria design a scrapbook. "How was your thing?" he'd asked without looking up. I remembered being 15, getting early acceptance to MIT's summer mathematics program, a program that accepted only 30 students worldwide. Father had nodded absently and said, "That's nice, but don't let it make you arrogant." Then he'd spent dinner talking about how Victoria's watercolour of a sunset showed profound emotional intelligence, and how he was considering funding a gallery showing for her. Every memory was a paper cut, small individually, but together they'd bled me dry. I studied harder than anyone at Western Prep. Perfect grades, perfect attendance, perfect behaviour. I thought excellence would make him see me. Instead, he funded Victoria's art gallery in Soho, while telling me I should be grateful for my state school education. When I built my own tech startup at 26, a logistics platform that revolutionised supply chain management, he invested in Victoria's third failed boutique instead. The startup had been my masterpiece in that first life. I'd identified a critical inefficiency in how manufacturers tracked inventory across multiple distribution points. My algorithm could reduce waste by 40% and cut delivery times in half. I'd worked 100-hour weeks, survived on coffee and ambition, pitched to 67 investors before finally securing seed funding from a venture capital firm in Boston. For 3 years, I'd built that company brick by brick. I'd hired a team of brilliant engineers. We'd secured contracts with mid-sized manufacturers, then larger ones. We were growing 30% quarter over quarter. Industry publications were calling us the future of supply chain optimization, and Father had never asked a single question about it. "You're too aggressive, Alyssa," he said when I begged him to at least attend my Series B announcement. "Business isn't feminine. It's exhausting watching you try so hard." But Victoria could fail at anything and receive endless support. Her first boutique sold upcycled vintage fashion and lost $200,000 in 8 months. Father called it paying for her education. Her second venture was a subscription box for artisanal lifestyle goods that collapsed after 3 boxes when she couldn't manage the logistics. Father called it learning her process. Her third attempt was a jewellery line that never launched because she didn't want to compromise her artistic vision for commercial viability. Each failure was celebrated as growth. My successes were treated as aggressive grasping. Victoria, meanwhile, had mastered the art of looking helpless while taking everything. She cried to Father about needing my algorithms for her retail optimization project. Naive and desperate for family approval, I gave them to her. She filed the patents under her name. When I confronted her, she laughed. Actually laughed and said, "You're so paranoid. Father always said you were unstable like your mother." The betrayal had unfolded over 6 months. First, she'd asked innocent questions about how my system worked. Then, she'd wanted to understand the technical side for a project she was developing. I'd walked her through the architecture, the decision trees, the optimization protocols. I'd been so hungry for connection, for someone in my family to value what I'd built, that I'd handed her everything. She'd hired developers, using Father's money, of course. She'd taken my specifications, my code structure, my innovation, and rebuilt it under her own company. When she filed the patents, she listed herself as the sole inventor. My name appeared nowhere. The company I'd built for 7 years was slowly absorbed into her brand. She took my investor meetings, my employees, my partnerships. By the time I understood what was happening, I was being pushed out of my own creation, painted as a jealous, difficult woman who couldn't handle her sister's success. My employees had started avoiding me. Victoria had poisoned them slowly, with concerned comments about my instability and concerning behaviour. She'd suggested I was having a breakdown, that the stress was too much for me, that perhaps I needed to step back for my own health. She'd held meetings without me, made decisions without my input, gradually erased me from the company I'd founded. When I tried to fight back legally, Father had intervened. He'd hired lawyers, not for me, but to mediate between Victoria and me before this family dispute became public. The lawyers he'd hired had somehow convinced me to sign documents I didn't fully understand, documents that gave Victoria operational control while I retained partial equity. I'd signed because I'd wanted the fighting to stop, wanted Father to stop looking at me like I was the problem. Within a year, Victoria had diluted my equity through additional funding rounds. I'd gone from founder to minority shareholder to footnote. The final betrayal came when I discovered the cancer. Stage 4, metastatic, inoperable. I told Victoria first, before Father, before anyone. I needed someone. Just once, I needed someone. We'd been at a coffee shop in Manhattan. I'd asked her to meet me, told her it was important. She'd arrived 20 minutes late, distracted, checking her phone. When I told her about the diagnosis, she'd gone pale. She'd reached across the table and grabbed my hands. "Oh my God, Ali, I'm so sorry. This is terrible." She'd cried, real tears streaming down her face. She'd asked about my treatment plan, my doctors, my prognosis. She'd insisted on coming to my appointments. She'd promised she'd take care of everything while I focused on getting better. "You're my sister," she'd said, squeezing my hands. "You're all I have. We're going to fight this together." For the first time in my adult life, I'd felt seen by her, loved by her. What she actually did was forge my signature on documents, transferring my remaining equity to her for safekeeping. She convinced Father I was mentally incompetent from the illness. She had me removed from my own apartment building's directory. By the time I was too weak to fight, I legally owned nothing. I was no one. The theft had been methodical. She'd brought documents to my apartment on days when I was weakest from chemotherapy. "Just paperwork," she'd said, "medical directives, power of attorney, things we need to have in place." I'd signed while barely conscious, trusting her completely. She'd used those documents to transfer my assets, close my bank accounts, redirect my mail. She told my friends and remaining colleagues that I'd asked not to be disturbed, that I wanted privacy during my treatment. By the time I'd realised what was happening, I was too sick to fight. My lawyers told me that with her power of attorney and father's testimony about my compromised mental state, any legal challenge would be lengthy and expensive. I had neither time nor money left. Father visited once, near the end. He stood in the doorway, couldn't even come closer, and said, "I hope you find peace, Alyssa. You were always so angry." He'd stayed for less than 5 minutes. He'd looked at me, dying, emaciated, barely recognisable, and the only emotion on his face had been discomfort. Not grief, not regret, just the irritation of someone forced to perform an unpleasant duty. "I've set aside some money for your final arrangements," he'd said. "Victoria will handle everything. She's been so strong through all this. I don't know what I'd do without her." I'd tried to speak, to tell him the truth about what Victoria had done, but I'd been too weak. The words wouldn't come. He'd taken my silence as acceptance and left. I died alone in that room, erased, while Victoria gave interviews about carrying on her sister's legacy. I'd read one of those interviews in my final days, pulled up on my phone with the last of my strength. She'd stood in front of my company's headquarters, the company she'd stolen, and talked about how much I'd taught her, how I'd wanted her to continue my work, how this was all in my honour. My last thought wasn't about the company or the money. It was simpler, more devastating. I had never mattered to anyone at all. I woke up in my childhood bedroom on the morning of my 16th birthday. The sunlight came through the same gauzy curtains. The same Radiohead poster hung above my desk. I'd bought it with babysitting money, trying to seem interesting, trying to be someone father might notice. My hands were smooth, unmarked by the IV scars and needle marks that had decorated them in those final months. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering, and caught sight of myself in the mirror. 16, alive, unbroken. The face staring back at me was young, unlined, full of a hope I no longer felt. My hair was longer than I'd worn it in years, pulled back in a ponytail. I was wearing the pyjamas I'd gotten for Christmas, soft, forgettable, chosen by Father's assistant, because he'd forgotten to shop for me himself. I touched my face, my arms, checking that this was real. No pain, no weakness, no cancer eating through my bones. For 10 minutes I sat on that bed and cried, not from joy, from the overwhelming weight of knowledge. I knew everything that was coming, every betrayal, every loss, every moment of hope that would be crushed. I carried 18 years of pain in a 16-year-old body, and the weight of it was crushing. Then I stopped crying. I washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror and made a decision: never again. For 3 days, I tested the reality. I went through the motions: school, dinner, homework. I watched Father praise Victoria's watercolour of a sunset. Such sensitivity, such depth. While barely glancing at my acceptance letter to a summer mathematics program at MIT, I watched Victoria hug me, tell me she loved me, ask to borrow my sociology notes because "You're so much smarter than me, Ali." Every word she said I now heard with the clarity of hindsight. Every smile from Father felt like the absence it had always been. At dinner on the 3rd day, Father asked Victoria about her plans for spring break. She launched into an elaborate description of a service trip to Costa Rica, helping endangered sea turtles, building schools, finding herself. It was all arranged through her expensive private school, all funded by Father. "What about you, Alyssa?" he asked almost as an afterthought. In my first life, I'd said I wanted to attend a coding boot camp. He'd frowned and said it seemed excessive and unfeminine. Victoria had immediately suggested I join her in Costa Rica instead, and I'd spent spring break being ignored by her and her friends while paying my own way. "I'll probably just catch up on reading," I said now. Father nodded, already turning back to Victoria. "Good. You're very sensible. Sensible. Code for boring, forgettable, not worth investing in. Victoria glanced at me, something like confusion crossing her face. She'd expected me to fight for attention, to compete. My compliance threw her off balance. Perfect. On the fourth day, I locked my bedroom door and made a decision that would define everything that followed. I would give them nothing. Not my work, not my vulnerability, not my desperate need for their love. I would take everything instead, but I would do it where they could never see it coming. The first change was internal. I stopped raising my hand in family dinners. When Father asked about my day, I said, "Fine, thank you," and nothing more. When Victoria asked for help with her homework, I smiled and said, "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're so creative." Something flickered in her eyes, confusion, maybe annoyance, but Father nodded approvingly. "Good, Elisa. Let your sister develop her own problem-solving skills. Perfect. Let them think I was finally learning my place." What they didn't see, I had started building my empire in the shadows. I remembered everything from my first life. Every market trend, every startup that would explode, every cryptocurrency spike, every real estate boom, every merger and acquisition. I had lived through 20 years of financial history, and now I was standing at the beginning of it all with a 16-year-old's clean slate. The knowledge was encyclopedic. I remembered reading about Bitcoin in 2011, watching it climb from nothing to thousands of dollars, and thinking I'd missed the boat. I remembered the exact date Facebook went public, the exact trajectory of Tesla stock, the exact quarter when a small company called Zoom would become essential infrastructure during a global pandemic. I remembered which startups would fail spectacularly and which would become unicorns. I remembered real estate markets, commodity prices, political elections that would shift entire economies. I had lost everything once. I would never lose anything again. I took the $3,000 odd I'd saved from birthday gifts and summer jobs, money I'd planned to spend on a car to impress Father, and opened a brokerage account under a shell company I registered in Delaware. The company name was deliberately boring, Apex Administrative Solutions LLC. No one would look twice. Setting up the company took 2 weeks of careful work. I used a registered agent service, filed the paperwork online, and created a business bank account with my shell company's EIN. Everything was legal, everything was traceable if someone looked hard enough, but no one would look. Why would they? I was a 16-year-old girl who existed at the margins of my own family. I bought Bitcoin at $8 per coin, 400 coins. In my previous life, I'd watched it climb to $60,000 and kicked myself for not buying in early. Now I had a second chance. But cryptocurrency was just the foundation. I needed something more substantial, more immediate. I remembered that in 3 months, a small pharmaceutical company called Meridian Biotech would announce breakthrough results for a rheumatoid arthritis drug. Their stock would jump 340% in 2 weeks. I put my remaining savings into their penny stock, bought at $1.20 per share. Then I waited, and I prayed, not to God, but to my own memory, that the timeline would hold. At school, I became invisible. I stopped competing for the top grade in calculus, letting Victoria's friend Jessica take it instead. I quit the debate team, where I'd been captain in my first life. I stopped running for student council positions. I made myself small, forgettable, while inside, I was running calculations that would have impressed every hedge fund manager in New York. My teachers noticed the change. Mrs. Patterson, my AP history teacher, pulled me aside after class one day. "Alyssa, is everything okay? You seem different this year. Quieter." "I'm fine, Miss Patterson. Just focusing on what's important. You know, you're one of my brightest students. I'd hate to see you not reach your full potential." I smiled, the same gentle, non-committal smile I'd perfected for Father. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to find balance. She'd let it go, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She thought I was depressed, maybe struggling with teenage anxiety. She had no idea I was spending my evenings analysing market trends and building a financial empire. "You seem different," Victoria said one night, sitting on my bed uninvited. She was twirling a strand of hair, watching me with that particular intensity she used when she wanted something. Quieter. "Just growing up, I guess. Father's proud of you, you know. He told me you're finally becoming more mature." She leaned forward, conspiratorial. "He's thinking of giving me a bigger role in his company. Maybe you could help me prepare? You're so good at business stuff." The older Lisa would have glowed at this chance to be useful, to bond with her sister. The newer Lisa saw the extraction for what it was. "I think you should do it on your own," I said gently. "Show him what you can do independently." Her smile tightened. "Sure, of course." She left my room, and I went back to researching emerging markets in Southeast Asia. I'd remembered reading about a telecommunications boom in Vietnam and Thailand, how early investors had made fortunes as the region modernized. I was building a target list of companies to invest in once my capital base grew. Meridian Biotech announced their results on a Tuesday morning. I was in AP English, supposedly analysing The Great Gatsby, when my phone buzzed with the alert. Stock price, $5.20 and climbing. By lunch, it hit $7.80. By closing bell, $12.40. I'd turned 2,500s into 25,000 in one day. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood in the stall, shaking. Not from excitement, from pure, cold vindication. It was working. The timeline was holding. I could do this. Over the next 18 months, I became a ghost. At home, I was the quiet, obedient daughter who caused no trouble. At school, I was the adequate student who stopped seeking attention. But in the digital spaces, where no one knew my age or face, I was someone else entirely. I sold the Meridian stock at its peak and diversified. I bought shares in a Swedish electric car company that wouldn't go mainstream for years, 20,000 shares at 14 each. I invested in a small cloud computing startup that would eventually be acquired by Amazon for $3 billion. I bought real estate in Austin, Texas, and Portland, Oregon, markets I knew would explode as tech workers fled expensive coastal cities. The real estate purchases required more elaborate structuring. I couldn't buy properties directly at 16, so I created additional layers of corporate entities. I hired a real estate attorney through an online legal service, paying premium rates for discretion and speed. The attorney set up trusts that owned LLCs that owned the properties. My name appeared nowhere on any deed or title. I bought a small apartment building in East Austin for $890,000. In my first life, I'd watched that neighborhood transform from working class to tech hub, seen those same buildings sell for over $4 million. I bought 3 houses in Portland for under $300,000 each, homes that would be worth over $1 million in less than a decade. By my 17th birthday, I had $1.2 million. By 18, $8.3 million. I managed everything through encrypted networks and offshore accounts. I hired contractors on freelance platforms to handle paperwork I couldn't do myself. I created layers of corporate structures so complex that even a forensic accountant would take years to untangle them. And at home, I accepted my role as the forgettable daughter with grace and silence. Father barely noticed me anymore. I'd become exactly what he'd always wanted. Quiet, unobtrusive, no trouble. Victoria was too absorbed in her own drama to pay attention to me. Her various creative ventures were already beginning their predictable cycle of excitement, investment, and failure. At dinner one night, during my senior year of high school, Father announced he was funding Victoria's first boutique. "She's found the perfect location in Soho," he said, beaming. "The rent is steep, but the foot traffic is incredible. This is going to be her breakthrough." I remembered this boutique, the upcycled vintage fashion disaster that lost $200,000 in 8 months. Victoria would blame the location, the market, the landlord, everyone but herself. That sounds wonderful, I said, reaching for the salad. You could learn something from your sister's entrepreneurial spirit, Father said, and there it was, the casual dismissal disguised as advice. She's not afraid to take risks. You're right, I said. She's very brave. Victoria shot me a look, trying to detect sarcasm, but my face was perfectly sincere. Under the table, my phone buzzed. One of my Seattle properties had just sold for 3 times what I'd paid. The notification lit up my screen. Net profit after closing costs, $847,000. I took another bite of salad and listened to Father talk about Victoria's creative vision. The turning point came during my high school graduation. Father had made a grand show of hosting a party at our house, inviting his business associates and their families. Victoria had just dropped out of her second semester at FIT to pursue her creative vision, which Father supported completely. She's an artist, he told his colleagues, gesturing with his wine glass. You can't cage that kind of spirit. These traditional educational paths aren't for everyone. Victoria needs room to explore, to create, to become. I had just been accepted to Columbia with a full academic scholarship, a full ride based on academic merit, something fewer than 1% of applicants received. Father mentioned it once, in passing, when someone directly asked about me. Oh yes, Alyssa's going to Columbia. She's very studious. That was all. Studious. A word that made me sound like a doll grinding away at textbooks, achieving through a joyless effort rather than natural brilliance. Mr. Hartwell, one of Father's oldest business partners, pressed further. Columbia's impressive. That's Ivy League. You must be proud. Father shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention on me. She works hard, always has. The implication was clear. I succeeded through grim determination, nothing special. Victoria succeeded through innate magic, but during the party I overheard something that changed everything. Father was in his study with Mr. Donovan, his business partner, and their voices carried through the air vent into the hallway where I stood, hidden behind a large potted plant. The real estate market is tightening, Father was saying. That shopping centre development in Newark is underwater. I need to liquidate some assets, but quietly. If Victoria knew I was having cash flow problems, she'd panic. She's sensitive about money. What about Alyssa? Mr. Donovan asked. Didn't you set up a trust for her, your first wife's life insurance? Father laughed, a bitter sound that made my stomach turn. That trust was supposed to be for her mother's memory, but Victoria needs capital for her gallery concept. It's actually viable this time. The business plan is solid. I'm thinking of redirecting those funds. Alyssa won't know until she's 25 anyway, and by then, Victoria's business will have made it all back threefold. Alyssa will understand. She's always been pragmatic. You're stealing from your own daughter's trust? I'm investing in the child with actual potential. Alyssa will be fine. She's got her scholarship. She doesn't need money. She needs to learn self-sufficiency. Victoria needs support, guidance, capital. She's got the vision. She just needs the resources to execute. And if the business fails? It won't. Not this time. I'm bringing in consultants, proper management. Victoria's the face, the creative mind. We'll handle the boring operational stuff. I stood in that hallway, rosary still, and felt something inside me calcify into diamond-hard clarity. He was going to steal my mother's money, the only thing she'd left me to fund Victoria's fourth doomed venture, and he believed it was justified. He genuinely believed Victoria's potential was worth more than my birthright. This was who he was. This was who they both were, and I would never, ever let them take anything from me again. That night, I made a call to Whitmore and Associates, one of Manhattan's most aggressive litigation firms. With my hidden wealth, I could afford the best. I had the trust documents pulled, verified, and legally secured with an injunction that would freeze any transfer attempts. The firm worked fast. They filed emergency motions citing fiduciary duty violations and potential fraud. Father would receive notice in 3 business days that his plan had been blocked by me, though he wouldn't know how I'd discovered it. The legal papers would come from attorneys he'd never heard of, representing trusts he didn't know existed. More importantly, I set up a new structure. Every asset I owned was now controlled by a labyrinth of trusts and corporations with names like Seraphim Holdings and Cornerstone Ventures Group. My name appeared nowhere. I was invisible, but I owned everything. When the legal notice arrived, Father called me at Columbia. I was in my dorm room, a modest single that I'd requested, despite being able to afford luxury off-campus housing. "Alyssa, what the hell is this?" His voice was tight with rage. "I just received papers from some law firm about your mother's trust. Did you do this?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me. Someone filed an injunction blocking me from accessing those funds. The lawyers are asking questions about how I've managed the trust, threatening audits. Did you hire them?" "How would I hire attorneys? I'm a college student on scholarship. I don't have money for lawyers." "Then who—" He stopped, confused. "The firm says they represent something called Seraphim Holdings. Do you know anything about that?" "No." "This is Victoria's money," he said, his voice turning cold. "That business could change her life. You're being selfish." "It's not Victoria's money. It's mine. From my mother." "Your mother died bringing you into this world. The least you could do is help your sister." The words should have hurt. In my first life, they would have devastated me. Now they rolled off like water off stone. "I have to go, Father. I have class. We're not done with this conversation." "Yes," I said softly. "We are." I hung up. He called back twice. I didn't answer. College was liberation. I moved into a modest dorm at Columbia, while secretly purchasing a penthouse in Tribeca under one of my corporate entities, $4.2 million paid in cash through layered shell companies. I told Father I was staying on campus to study while I was actually attending board meetings via video conference for 3 companies I'd acquired majority shares in. The penthouse was my sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, minimalist furniture, a home office with 6 monitors displaying real-time market data from exchanges around the world. No one from my old life knew it existed. I'd arrive at the dorm at Columbia in the morning for classes, participate in study groups, eat in the dining hall. I'd become friends with other students, casual friendships that required nothing deep, nothing that would make them curious about my life. Then, I'd leave campus in the evening and take the subway to Tribeca, transforming from college student to CEO in the 20-minute ride. Victoria called me sometimes, usually drunk, usually crying about Father's increasing distance or some man who'd disappointed her. I listened. I made sympathetic sounds. I gave her nothing useful. "The boutique is struggling," she admitted one night, 9 months after it opened. "Father's angry. He says I'm not trying hard enough. But I am, Ali. I'm there every day. I post on social media. I reach out to influencers. Nothing's working." "That's hard, I said, reviewing a quarterly report from one of my pharmaceutical holdings. Father keeps talking about how much he invested. He makes me feel like such a failure. In my first life, I would have rushed to comfort her, probably offered to help somehow, gotten entangled in her drama. Now I let the silence stretch. "Ali, are you there?" "I'm here. I'm listening." "Sometimes I feel like you're not even my sister anymore. You're so distant." "I'm just focused on school. I'm sure the boutique will turn around." "It wouldn't. I knew exactly when it would close, how much father would lose, how Victoria would blame everyone but herself. I also knew it was only the first in a series of failures that would eventually leave her bankrupt and desperate. "I miss you, Ali," she said once, near midnight. Her words were slurred from wine. "I feel like you're not really there anymore." "I'm here," I said, watching real-time trading data from Tokyo flash across my monitor. "I'm always here." What she meant was that I was no longer available for exploitation. I had become unreachable. At 20, I quietly acquired a controlling stake in a medical diagnostics company that was pioneering AI-assisted radiology. The company was struggling, undervalued, on the verge of bankruptcy despite revolutionary technology. I bought in at $2 per share, took a board seat under a pseudonym and thick corporate veil, and brought in new management. Within 3 years, that company would be valued at $8 billion. My stake would be worth $1.6 billion. At 21, I bought a lithium mine in Chile. The seller thought they were negotiating with an Australian mining conglomerate. They had no idea the conglomerate was wholly owned by a chain of trusts controlled by a college student in New York. At 22, I orchestrated my first hostile takeover. A shipping logistics company with excellent infrastructure but incompetent leadership. I accumulated shares quietly for 6 months, then struck during a weak quarter. The board never saw it coming. I installed new management, streamlined operations, and tripled the company's value in 18 months. At 23, my net worth crossed $500 million. I owned everything from an AI startup revolutionizing medical diagnostics, to apartment buildings in Manhattan, to a lithium mine in Chile, to controlling shares in 17 different companies. My portfolio was so diversified that even a market crash couldn't touch me. And then I did something that would seem incomprehensible to anyone who knew my trajectory. I applied to join a convent. Not out of religious fervour, I'd never been particularly devout. But I remembered something from my first life, a documentary I'd watched during one of my final hospital nights about cloistered communities. It had been 3 a.m, I'd been unable to sleep from the pain, and I'd found myself watching this documentary about nuns who'd chosen lives of silence and prayer. The nun they'd interviewed had said something that haunted me. "In silence, I found a freedom the world could never offer. No one expects anything from me here. I am invisible to their demands, and in that invisibility, I am whole. Invisible, whole, untouchable." The words had lodged in my mind like a seed. In my previous life, I'd been defined by visibility, by trying to be seen, acknowledged, valued. I'd built a company and watched it be taken because I'd wanted recognition so badly I'd made myself vulnerable. Now, I had more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I had power that would make Fortune 500 CEOs weep with envy. I had built an empire so vast and hidden that no one could touch it. What I didn't have was peace. The Holy Sisters of Perpetual Grace accepted me after a year of candidacy. They saw a young woman seeking peace and purpose. They had no idea I was routing hedge fund strategies between morning prayers and vespers. The convent was in upstate New York, nestled in the Catskills, a 3-hour drive from the city. It was beautiful, ancient stone buildings, gardens that had been tended for over 100 years, a chapel with stained glass windows that painted the floors in coloured light. During my candidacy year, I lived in a small room and participated in the daily rhythm of prayer. Lauds at dawn, work in the morning, midday prayer, more work, vespers at dusk, compline before bed. It was structured, predictable, and completely separate from the chaos of the outside world. I told the Mother Superior that I had a small inheritance that I managed online, that I needed occasional internet access to handle these affairs. She agreed, seeing it as a sign of practical responsibility. She had no idea my small inheritance was approaching $1 billion. Father's reaction to the news was predictable. "You're throwing your life away," he said over the phone. He hadn't visited me in person in 3 years, not since the trust fund incident had made things uncomfortable between us. "This is just like you, Alyssa, always dramatic, always desperate for attention." The irony was so thick I almost laughed. I was becoming a nun specifically to avoid attention, to disappear so completely that no one would ever think to look for power in my hands. "I found my calling," I said simply. "You're wasting your Columbia education. Do you know how disappointed your mother would be?" It was the first time he'd mentioned my mother in years, and only to weaponize her memory. The old Alyssa might have crumbled. The new Elisa felt nothing. "I need to go, Father. Don't expect any support from me for this ridiculous decision." "I don't expect anything from you. I never have." Victoria was more confused than angry. She called me crying, which had become her default state since her second business failure. "But you could do anything. Why this?" "Because no one will look for me here," I thought. "Because I can disappear completely and build something they can never touch or understand or take from me." "I need peace," I told her. "But what about your life, your future? What about us?" "What about us, Victoria?" Silence. She had no answer for that. There was no us. There never had been. "I'll pray for you," I added, and I meant it in the most secular way possible. I would think about her sometimes, the way you think about a cautionary tale. "This is insane," she said. "Maybe," I replied, "but it's my choice." She hung up. I packed my few possessions and prepared for my new life. Life at the convent was exactly what I needed. The structure, the silence, the complete absence of expectation. I wore the same simple habit every day. I attended prayers, I worked in the garden, I read scripture. And in the hours between compline and matins, when the world slept, I managed an empire. My room was austere, a narrow bed, a wooden desk, a crucifix on the wall. But hidden in a false bottom of my desk drawer was a satellite-connected device that gave me access to everything. I conducted board meetings via encrypted audio, I approved acquisitions, I reviewed quarterly reports, I moved millions with the tap of a finger, all while Sister Catherine snored in the room next door. The other nuns saw Sister Elisa, quiet, diligent, perhaps a bit too fond of working alone in the library. They didn't see the woman who just orchestrated a hostile takeover of a medical supply company or negotiated a partnership deal with a Korean electronics manufacturer. I was 26 when my net worth crossed $1 billion. I was in the chapel when the notification came through my hidden device, a gentle vibration against my palm. I'd just structured a deal that gave me controlling interest in a rare earth mineral company that would become essential to electric vehicle batteries. The math was elegant, the execution flawless. I finished my rosary and went to help Sister Maria prepare lunch. We peeled potatoes in comfortable silence, and she hummed an old hymn. She had no idea the woman beside her had just become a billionaire. The empire grew. I acquired a pharmaceutical company working on gene therapy. I bought shares in renewable energy startups across 3 continents. I purchased commercial real estate in cities I knew would boom. My wealth compounded faster than I could track. $2 billion, then $5 billion, then $20 billion. Each acquisition was strategic. Each investment perfectly timed, using knowledge only I possessed. Father died when I was 28. Heart attack, sudden, at his office. Victoria called me, hysterical, begging me to come home for the funeral. I went, not for him, but to see how the story ended. The funeral was well attended. Father had been prominent enough to draw a crowd. Victoria stood at the front, draped in designer black that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, accepting condolences like a tragic heroine. She'd gained weight, lost her sharpness. 3 failed businesses had worn her down. Father's company was hemorrhaging money under her mismanagement. When she saw me in my habit, she stared. "You actually came." He was my father. He never understood you, she said, and for a moment something human flickered in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. Neither did I. The will was reading was theatre. Father had left Victoria everything, the company, the house, his remaining assets, which turned out to be far less than anyone expected. His cash flow problems had been worse than I'd overheard. To me, he left a letter. I opened it in my childhood bedroom, now repurposed as Victoria's home gym, complete with equipment that looked barely used. The letter was short. Alyssa, I know I failed you. I was bitter about your mother's death and I took it out on you your entire life. That was wrong. I hope you find peace in your new life. You were always too good for this world, Father. Too good for this world. A posthumous exile disguised as a compliment. An apology that changed nothing, given only when it was safe, when I could no longer demand anything from him. I burned the letter in the fireplace and felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, not even satisfaction. Just the quiet recognition that he'd been right about one thing. I was too good for his world. I'd built my own. Victoria's downfall was poetic in its inevitability. Without Father's name and network to prop her up, the company collapsed within 18 months. She made desperate decisions, trusted the wrong partners, borrowed from predatory lenders. By the time she declared bankruptcy, she'd lost everything. The business, the house, her reputation. She called me, of course. 2 a.m, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. Ali, I need help. I have nothing. Please, you're my sister. You're all I have left. I was reviewing a proposed merger in the pharmaceutical sector when her call came through. 2.3 billion in total value. My legal team needed my sign-off by morning. I'll pray for you, I told her. What? No, I need actual help. Money, connections, something. I'm a nun, Victoria. I don't have money or connections. I have faith. Don't do this. Don't you dare do this. Her voice turned sharp, familiar, the same tone she'd used when I confronted her about the patents. After everything I've done for you, what did you do for me? I asked, my voice perfectly calm. Tell me one thing you ever gave me that wasn't taken first. Silence, long enough that I thought she'd hung up. You know, she finally said, her voice small and hollow. You've always known. Yes. Were you waiting? All this time, were you just waiting for this? No, I said, and it was true. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just becoming someone you couldn't touch. She hung up. We never spoke again. I am 34 now, the same age I was when I died in my first life. My empire is worth $1.3 trillion. I own pieces of everything. Technology, energy, agriculture, finance, real estate, biotech. My companies employ 400,000 people worldwide. My foundations have funded malaria eradication programs, literacy initiatives, climate research. I've built schools in countries Father couldn't find on a map. I've funded cancer research that will save thousands of lives, including from the disease that killed me once. I've done more good than Father could have imagined, and he never knew I existed beyond his disappointment. I still live at the convent. I still attend morning prayers. I still work in the garden, dirt under my fingernails, sun on my face. Sister Maria and I planted tomatoes last week, and she told me stories about her own family, the daughter she left behind to join the order 40 years ago. Do you regret it? I asked her. Never, she said, patting the soil around a seedling. I found what I needed here. Peace, purpose, myself. I understood completely. Last week, I approved funding for a new women's technology scholarship at Columbia, full ride, mentorship, career placement guaranteed. 500 recipients per year. It's named after my mother, Elizabeth Chen Memorial Scholarship. Victoria will probably see the announcement and never connect it to me. Why would she? Her sister is a nun with no money, no power, no presence in the world that matters to people like her. I could reveal myself. I could buy a mansion, collect art, throw parties on yachts, make father's old colleagues choke on their dismissals. I could force Victoria to face what I've become, make her understand the magnitude of what she tried to steal and failed to destroy. But that would require them to matter. And somewhere between the rosary beads and the stock tickers, between morning prayers and midnight acquisitions, between the girl who died begging for love and the woman who built empires in silence, I realised the ultimate truth. My freedom was never about revenge. It was about becoming so completely, utterly untouchable that their opinions dissolved into irrelevance. I didn't destroy them. I outgrew them. They live in a world where worth is measured by attention and approval, where power must be displayed to be real. I live in a world I built myself, where I am accountable to no one, hidden from everyone, and more powerful than they could ever comprehend. The chapel bells ring. Time for evening prayer. I close my laptop, hide it away, and walk to the chapel. Sister Catherine is already there lighting candles. She nods to me and I nod back. The light catches the stained glass, throwing patterns of blue and gold across the stone floor. She thinks I'm praying for salvation. I'm calculating the soul market opening in 6 hours. There's a semiconductor manufacturer I've been watching, and the timing is perfect for acquisition. But right now, in this moment, I'm also genuinely here, kneeling on these worn stones, breathing in the scent of incense and old wood, feeling the peace that comes from being exactly where I choose to be. Victoria is somewhere out there, struggling. Father is gone. The people who tried to erase me have faded into insignificance. And I am here, invisible and infinite, holding the whole world in hands they never saw coming. I close my eyes and smile. I've never been more at peace.